Welcome, fellow enthusiasts. Today we begin a deeply emotional journey, one that spans decades of silence, uncertainty, and unwavering hope. This is the story of a woman who spent 50 years waiting for the soldier she loved, believing he would return despite every sign that he was gone forever. Before we begin, please remember to click the like and subscribe buttons and hit the bell icon to stay updated with our latest videos. Now, let's begin this remarkable story. Our story opens in the early 1970s in a peaceful rural village tucked between wide fields of wheat and long stretches of open sky. Life moved slowly there. Neighbors knew one another by name, families worked the land together, and every evening the sun dipped behind the hills in a soft golden glow. In the heart of that village lived a young woman named Elena Markova. She was gentle, intelligent, and full of a quiet optimism that seemed to brighten every room she stepped into. Elena had fallen in love with a young soldier named Andrei, a man known for his calm nature, his thoughtful eyes, and the way he carried himself with quiet determination. As the war escalated, conscription spread across the region. Andrei, like many young men of his age, received the call to serve. He did not protest, nor did he hide his worry, but he felt the weight of leaving Elena behind. On the morning of his departure, the sky was still dim, painted in the soft grays of dawn. Soldiers gathered near a transport truck at the edge of the village, their breath forming pale clouds in the cool morning air. Elena stood beside Andrei in silence, holding his hands tightly as if refusing to let go would somehow change fate. Just before boarding, Andrei turned to her and looked into her eyes with a depth of emotion she never forgot. He told her he would return. Not as a possibility, not as a hope, but as a promise. A promise spoken with the certainty of a man who believed he could overcome anything the world placed before him. "I will come back to you," he said softly. "I promise." With those final words, he stepped onto the transport truck. Elena watched him until the vehicle disappeared into the distance, carrying away the man she loved and leaving her with nothing but a vow she believed in with her whole heart. Silence. After the letters. In the weeks that followed Andrei's departure, Elena adjusted to the strange quiet that settled over her life. She continued her daily routines, waking early to tend the garden, helping her neighbors with sewing, and writing long letters she hoped would reach him. To her relief, the first of Andrei's letters arrived within a month. His handwriting was careful, steady, and unmistakably his. He described long marches through unfamiliar terrain, the camaraderie of his fellow soldiers, and the heaviness he felt being so far from home. But he always ended each letter the same way, reminding her of the promise he made and urging her not to worry. More letters came, sometimes 2 in a single week, sometimes with long gaps in between. Elena read each one countless times, tracing her fingers over the ink as if she could feel him through the paper. The letters gave her a sense of rhythm, something to hold on to during the long days. The village, too, seemed to revolve around the arrival of the post. Families gathered eagerly when the mail carrier rode in, hoping for news, fearing the worst, whispering prayers under their breath. But as months turned into a year, the tone of the letters began to shift. They grew shorter, more cautious. Andrei mentioned longer stretches of silence, colder nights, and the increasing uncertainty that hovered over their unit. Still, Elena held on to every word, believing that as long as the letters arrived, he was safe. Then one day, they simply stopped. The first missed week didn't alarm her. The next made her uneasy. After a month, she asked the postmaster whether there had been delays. He assured her that the postal routes were still functioning, but supply lines were becoming unpredictable. Elena tried to quiet the growing worry in her chest, convincing herself that the mail would resume. But as winter approached, the silence deepened. Families throughout the village faced the same fear. Some received official notices confirming their worst nightmares. Others were told their loved ones were missing. But many, too many, received nothing at all. Elena found herself stuck in that terrible in-between, where hope and dread collided every morning when she walked to the village square and waited for a letter that never came. Despite the mounting pressure to accept what seemed inevitable, Elena refused to surrender her belief in Andrei's return. She kept his letters in a small wooden box by her bedside, reading them on nights when the loneliness became overwhelming. The promise he had made echoed inside her mind, steady and clear. And although the world around her whispered that she should let go, Elena quietly, stubbornly, and wholeheartedly held on. The waiting years. The seasons began their slow rotation, marking the passage of time more reliably than any calendar Elena kept. Spring brought fields of green. Summer basked the village in warm sunlight. Autumn painted the trees in deep oranges and reds. Winter blanketed everything in the quiet hush of snow. Year after year, Elena watched the world change while the space in her life that belonged to Andre remained painfully, stubbornly still. She continued her routines, though each task carried a different weight. The garden she once tended with absent-minded cheer now became her sanctuary, a place where she could work in silence, letting her hands move through the soil while her thoughts drifted endlessly to the man she had not heard from in years. Visitors would occasionally stop by, offering sympathetic smiles or gentle attempts to persuade her to move on. "He would want you to live your life," they'd say. "You're still so young, Elena. You should find happiness again." But she couldn't. Not fully. Not while the promise lingered like a soft echo she could never quite shake. She believed that if he were truly gone, she would feel it. Some shift inside her, some undeniable signal. But she felt nothing except the steady, persistent certainty that his story was not finished. Still, the silence was heavy. Too heavy. And the world was changing fast. By the late 1980s, the political landscape had shifted dramatically. Records were being opened, old files reviewed. Some families finally received answers after decades of not knowing. Elena went to the regional office once, standing in a long line of weary people clutching faded documents and photographs. When her turn came, the official glanced at her papers, flipped through a stack of folders, and shook his head. "No record," he said. "Nothing confirming death, but nothing confirming survival either." It was the same emptiness she had lived with for years. So Elena returned home, resumed her quiet life, and kept waiting. She filled her days with work and her evenings with old memories. She held on to her hope with a quiet, steadfast resilience. Not the loud, blazing hope of youth, but the slow-burning kind that endures storms. By the time the village's children had grown into adults with families of their own, Elena had become a symbol of patience and devotion. People admired her, pitied her, questioned her, but no one understood her, because beneath all the years, all the silence, and all the unanswered questions, Elena still felt the same truth she felt on the day Andre left. He would come back, and she would be there when he did. A life lived in half-light years turned into decades, reshaping Elena's world piece by piece. Her parents passed away, leaving her the small wooden house she had grown up in. Friends moved to larger towns or bigger cities, seeking opportunities that never arrived in the quiet village. Children she once watched over became adults, starting lives she had never dared to imagine for herself. Elena aged gracefully, though life left its marks on her. Her hair silvered at the temples, faint lines settled around her eyes and mouth, but her gaze remained clear, steady. The same gentle determination that defined her youth still lingered behind her eyes. She built a life, yes, but a quiet one. A life lived in half-light. She worked at the village school for years, teaching reading and writing to eager children. She volunteered at the church, tended the community garden, and spent long evenings sewing by lamplight. Her days were filled with purpose, but always with a sense of incompleteness, as if she were living only part of the story, waiting for the other half to unfold. As the world modernized, the village changed too. Roads were paved. A small market opened. Electricity became stable. Younger families brought new energy and noise, though none of it disturbed Elena's careful tranquility. People often saw her walking the same path she had walked since her youth, from her house to the garden, from the garden to the post office, even when she knew there would be no letter waiting. Every morning she still opened the top drawer of her bedside table, where she kept the wooden box filled with Andre's letters. She read them less frequently now, not because the words mattered less, but because she had memorized every line. His voice lived inside her mind, speaking with the same quiet certainty he had spoken with on the morning he left. She never remarried, never pursued another romance. It wasn't that she didn't have opportunities, she did. But her heart had made its choice long ago, and she saw no reason to alter the course of something that felt so deeply true. Some nights she sat outside under the stars, listening to the soft chorus of crickets and the distant rustle of wind in the trees. She wondered where Andre might be. If he was alive, if he was safe, if he still remembered the promise he made, and every time she felt the same steady certainty settle in her chest. Some stories simply take longer to unfold, and theirs was far from over. A name resurfaces then. Nearly 50 years after Andre vanished from all official records, something unexpected happened. It started with a journalist, a young man from the city who had recently begun investigating old wartime archives. He specialized in forgotten histories, stories that had slipped through the cracks of time. During his research on missing soldiers, he stumbled upon a peculiar detail, a handwritten report filed decades earlier about a soldier who had been separated from his unit during a winter retreat. The name, Andrei Markov. The report was vague and incomplete, as if someone had intended to finish it but never did. But the name caught the journalist's attention, and he dug deeper. After several weeks, he discovered a series of unclassified documents describing unidentified soldiers who had survived but lost their memories due to trauma. Some had been sent to remote care facilities, others had been relocated far from their homeland. One file in particular, faded, mismatched, almost discarded, described a soldier with no recollection of his past, recovered in a rural medical outpost hundreds of miles from the front. The journalist felt a spark of curiosity. He traveled to the outpost, now abandoned and overgrown. But through interviews with elderly locals, he discovered that one of the patients from that era had survived and lived in a nearby town under a different name, a man in his 70s, quiet, kind, alone. The journalist followed the trail, each step revealing more coincidences, too many to ignore. Eventually, he found the man. He introduced himself gently, explained his research, and asked if he could take a photograph. The man agreed, and when the journalist studied the photo later that night, comparing it with a faded one from the last letter Elena received, his heart pounded. Same eyes, same shape of the jaw, same quiet expression. He wasn't just looking at a coincidence. He was looking at a man who had been missing for nearly half a century. The journalist knew what he had to do. He packed his bags, prepared his notes, and made his way toward the village where a woman named Elena had waited her entire life for someone everyone else believed was gone. The return. The morning the journalist arrived, the village was calm, the air cool and crisp. Children played in the distance, their laughter floating through the quiet streets. Elena was tending her small garden, trimming the rose bushes that bloomed in soft shades of pink and white. She didn't notice the man approaching until he called her name gently. "Excuse me. Are you Elena Markova?" She straightened, brushed dirt from her hands, and nodded. She looked at him with polite curiosity, wondering why a stranger from the city would seek her out. The journalist introduced himself, explained his research, and mentioned the name she had not heard spoken aloud in decades. Andrei Markov. The world stopped. Her breath caught in her chest, her hands trembling as she gripped the garden fence for support. She listened in silence as the journalist told her everything he had learned: the lost records, the unnamed soldier, the long years spent living under a different identity. Elena felt as if she were standing outside her own body, hearing a story too impossible to believe, yet too familiar to deny. Then he showed her the photograph. Her knees nearly gave out. Time had carved deep lines into Andrei's face, softened his features, and silvered his hair. But the eyes were exactly the same. She touched the photo with trembling fingers, tears welling in her eyes. For a long moment she couldn't speak. Where is he?" she finally whispered. The journalist told her. A small town a few hours' drive away, the man lived alone in a modest home cared for by a local nurse. He still suffered from memory loss, but recently had begun experiencing flashes. Brief visions of a village, a woman, a promise. Elena didn't wait another second. The journalist offered her a ride, and she accepted with a quiet, breathless nod. As they drove, the world outside seemed unreal, a blur of fields, winding roads, and shifting light. Her heart pounded with every passing minute, the weight of 50 years pressing down on her until she felt both terrified and alive in ways she hadn't felt since she was young. When they finally arrived, the nurse greeted them warmly and led Elena down a quiet hallway. Her footsteps echoed softly. Her hands shook. Every breath felt like a storm inside her chest. Then the nurse opened a door, and there he was, older, thinner, but unmistakably him. Andrei looked up, puzzled at first, then suddenly overwhelmed by something he couldn't explain. His eyes softened, filled with something ancient and unspoken. "Elena," he whispered. Her tears fell freely as she stepped forward. "Andrei, I never stopped waiting." Andrei rose slowly from his chair, his hands shaking as he reached out. When their fingers touched, something inside him shifted, a spark, a flicker, a memory buried under decades of silence. He inhaled sharply, eyes widening as distant visions returned in sudden, disjointed flashes. A sunrise over a small village, the scent of roses, a young woman's laughter, the warmth of her hands holding his. "Elena!" he whispered again, his voice cracking. "I remember." As the afternoon sun streamed through the window, casting warm light over their entwined hands, Andrei whispered the words he had spoken the day he left, words buried deep within him but resurfacing with perfect clarity. "I promised I would come back to you." Elena's smile trembled, filled with both joy and the ache of everything they had lost. "And you did," she said. "It just took a little longer." They sat there, old now, but together, finally, undeniably together. The years that had been stolen from them could never be replaced, but the moment they had now was something time could not take away. And in that quiet room, surrounded by the soft hum of the world outside, two souls who had been separated by war, memory, and fate finally found their way back to each other. A promise made, a promise kept, even 50 years later. She pressed his hands to her face, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I knew you were alive," she said softly. "I knew it. I felt it." The nurse quietly stepped out, giving them the time they had been denied for half a century. The journalist remained near the door, silently witnessing the kind of reunion that only happens once in a lifetime. They sat together, their hands never parting. Andrei asked questions in a voice filled with awe, how long she had waited, how she had lived, how she had managed to keep hope alive for so many years. Elena answered gently, telling him everything but never once blaming him for the decades of absence. It wasn't his fault. War had stolen his memories. Time had carried him far away. But love had carried her through all of it, and in that quiet room, surrounded by the soft hum of the world outside, two souls who had been separated by war, memory, and fate finally found their way back to each other. A promise made, a promise kept, even 50 years later.